Amalia, Alejandrina, Abuelo, Victor, I think it was, Carol, Coral. So thank you also for sharing, holding this space, and all of you kind of inviting us into this broader and deeper space that we all experience together, and that we feel again now, and that is so much needed and needs to be deepened. Laura and Vivi and everyone in the team for all the work and love you have been putting into co-holding the space. We come together in a moment where we all feel that a space like that is more needed perhaps than ever. We all are, I assume, part of these different processes of death and rebirth. We see it in many places, we see it in many contexts, and these are exactly the moments where we need to come together. At the Presencing Institute, we had a senior faculty meeting with Laura and then several others a few days ago, and people were sharing from across world regions about what's happening in the different programs and initiatives and activities. And one pattern that I found most interesting that came out of that for me very clearly is that in the current moment where the forces of destruction, the forces of absencing, the forces of polarization are amplified to a level that we perhaps have not seen before, that it is exactly in these moments where holding the whole together, particularly if you try to do that in a highly polarized situation, feels like almost impossible to do. Feels like whatever the whole is you're holding together, it was always difficult to hold it, right? We all know that from any community effort. But under the current condition, it's even more difficult to do the holding. And because of that, it is even more significant, even more important that we do that. That's truly why I believe what we are about to do, what we are engaging here in this process, what started in Uruguay earlier this year in March, and what we will continue in Chile, as we just learned in a few months in March, why that is so significant. I have seen that with my own eyes. I have seen it in Southeast Asia. I have seen it in Africa. I have seen it in other places, that it takes for the more profound level of change to take root, to take to become able to really level up on to a way that is beginning to change the system. That takes multiple cycles. It takes multiple years. Nothing of significance happens in 1 year. It takes the sustained effort. And those of us who are part of these efforts know that often it's not big groups who are holding this together. It's usually it boils down to relatively few of us We all know that from our communities. And this is exactly why what we are about to do really matters. Laura asked me to share a little bit, so maybe a little kind of preview. It's like a precursor of some of the things that we want to move into more deeply when we are going to meet in Chile. And allow me maybe to share just a couple of pictures around that. This one, I don't know, you may remember kind of that's kind of what we just talked about, the moment of disruption that we are experiencing in different contexts. And what I often notice is that particularly, and what is actually impacting me on a really deep level is when I talk with young people, the outlook, right? So that as if kind of our agency in what's going to happen is very limited. And that's a feeling we see in many places taking shape. And one of the deeper qualities that we want to embody as change makers, of course, is the quality of hope. And what I learned about hope is that hope is not optimism. So hope is not a conviction that everything will turn out well. But hope is the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. So in other words, hope is a quality we can access within ourselves that allows us to activate agency even in the face of very challenging situations. That kind of for sometimes may even create the feeling for others that maybe it's already too late. So I know that's a feeling that's in the world. It's a reality we are working with, and that's why I found this quote by Václav Havel always very, very helpful, because it's really about a different place to access within ourselves. And the other quote that I want to maybe set the tone with is something really about systems thinking. And the essence of systems thinking can be summarized now often is related to what people also refer to as bifurcation points or tipping points, essentially where you reach a point where small differences can make a big difference, right? Small differences today, few people today, if aligning in the right way, can make a significant difference going forward. And here is how one of the eminent thought leaders in systems thinking has articulated that principle, Ilya Prigogine. When a system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to lift the entire system to a higher order. Small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos, and yes, chaos is not in short supply, have the capacity to lift the entire system to a higher order. So that's always, I have something, because when you think about the current moment, so what is that? So what do we know about this current moment? Well, on a planetary scale, we live in one of these moments where, you know, that chaos keeps increasing, where we move from one state to another, and where exactly kind of these small differences can have a significant impact going forward. So I want to, the main image, kind of the other one that I wanted to share with you, is a different way to think about systems thinking. Often systems thinking, and I think I have done that before, is used by using the iceberg model. But what I want to share today is a different image, and that's the image where I, you know, it's not literally kind of the farm where I grew up, but I grew up on a farm. So I want to use the field as a metaphor for systems thinking. And what do we see when we look at a field? So when you look at this, what do you see? We see the field has two parts, right? It's above the ground, the visible stuff, and below the ground, you know, the invisible stuff, the root systems. And just as, you know, it's like what's below the waterline, right, in the iceberg model. So it's pretty much the same thing. And then when you say, okay, in a social field, right, what really is the invisible, that what's when you apply this to social systems, right, what's the visible part, right, above the ground in a social field? It's kind of all the, you know, different systems and sectors and outcomes and so forth. And what is the invisible part? The invisible part below the ground, the soil structure, if you want, is the quality of relationships. And that's really what we do. Like the regenerative farmer is really improving the quality of the soil. We as change makers, what we really do is improving the qualities of our relationships. So I just want to invite you to a little meditation, kind of, if you just kind of, if we now double click on this one and just stay with that image of the social field, the visible part above the ground, the invisible part below the ground, the deeper layers of the soil, which is really the quality of our relationships. So let's look into that. So if we take that as a point of departure, I want to first give you a little tour through some of the different sectors and changes we see above the ground, right? You know all these sectors. Agriculture, education, health, and so on and so forth. And so let me just, and below the ground, so the story I'm going to share is really a story from changing the structure of relationships, how these sectors operate, from output and efficiency centric to user and stakeholder centric to ecosystem and regeneration centric. So in agriculture, it's essentially kind of the evolution we have seen is from industrial agriculture to sustainable agriculture. So it's basically doing less bad things, right, on, you know, onto the soil, onto nature, Mother Nature. But regenerative agriculture really is kind of not just reducing the harm, but, you know, evolving, right, together with and kind of increasing biodiversity and really being in the service with Mother Nature as a living being. Food as medium for healing planet and people. In education, we have been moving from teaching for testing to more student-centric learning to what we just actually started yesterday, a major initiative towards education for human flourishing, integrating head, heart, and hand with several country initiatives involved. In medicine, right, we move from evidence-based medicine to patient journey to sources of health, rather than just combating the symptoms of sickness, strengthening the sources of health and strengthening the sources of planetary health. In business, resource efficiency to ESG to business as a force for good, right? With most, most of the businesses here, some of them, moving into this, and a few of them beginning to move into this field here. In finance, extractive finance, ESG and impact investing, to regenerative finance, really moving the money where we have too much, which is basically extractive capital, to where we have too little, which is essentially regenerating our commons, right? Our ecological, social, and cultural commons. And then tech, AI, and then kind of maybe more machine usefulness, not just machine intelligence, to how to use the inner circle really is how to use the power of AI for the well-being of all, and not just kind of the well-being of a few. And all of that, of course, has to do with the evolution of governance from the traditional mechanisms to more participative forms, to forms that are based on shared awareness and action from shared awareness. So you could say that's basically what we see. We see like a move, some convergence here into this kind of 4.0 space, but you still see the mainstream stuck in the outer ring, the outer sphere, the 2.0, beginning to move into this middle sphere. And then the real innovators, right, moving into this inner sphere that yet hasn't enough momentum. I think that's what we see in most systems in most countries today. Now, why do we not see more momentum on the upper half? Because we lack the shift of relationship on the lower half. And what is that shift of relationship? It has to do with listening, right? Deepening our quality of listening as we try to practice with each other. It has to do with conversation, from debate to dialogue to collective creativity. It has to do with leadership, from managing by objectives to participative to a more humble form of leaderships. And of course, it has to do with civil society and how we work together across sectors, from just engaging in advocacy, which is a great starting point, to through multi-stakeholder processes, to really working in ways where we co-sense and co-create with each other. So the most interesting thing is this space of convergence in the heart of the system here. And what are the bigger themes that we are engaging with here? They have to do with decolonization, with a profound mindset shift from ego to eco, and with activating the capacity to really sensing and operating from the emerging future rather than just reacting against the past. So to sum this up, what I'm really saying is this, that the evolution of our institutions and sectors that you see on the upper half can be seen as a manifestation of an evolving human consciousness that moves from ecosystem awareness to stakeholder awareness, and from stakeholder awareness to ecosystem awareness. And as we do that, we begin to embody kind of the qualities of regeneration, of ego to eco, and of beginning to sense and actualize emerging future possibilities rather than just extending the past. And as we begin to practice these principles in small islands of coherence, what we see is that we begin to activate a larger field. So we could perhaps say kind of an ecosystem of coherence, not just kind of a small island of coherence, but a whole ecosystem of coherence. So that, I would say, is one story of what's going on today, right? But what is the other story? The other story has to do with dark tech. It has to do with dark money, right? Basically manipulating politics. It has to do with hyper extraction. Think about the fossil fuel industry and the most recent developments there. It has to do with, in terms of governance, autocracy and kakistocracy. Kakistocracy means the rule of the worst, so that the worst people, right, are moved to the top to rule kind of the systems at issue. Another phenomenon we have been seeing as of late in places, here in the US, no exception, polarization, right? We move kind of how we deal with differences is that we move towards polarization, war, and, in some cases, civil war. The leadership style, more authoritarian. The conversation is really moving towards silencing, right? Think about the whole cancel culture and othering. Listening is degrading, ecosystem breakdowns, indoctrination in school systems, rewriting of history. In health, I would say opioidization, that's maybe too much an American term here or a US term, but it's really, what I mean by that is making people, creating patterns of dependence rather than of autonomy. So if you look at the outer circle, what really is that? What's kind of the organizing operating system? And I would say it is a matrix of manipulation. So essentially, what this outer ring is about is to manipulate human behavior on the scale of the whole. And that's where dark tech and dark money are really the key driving forces that we see are so much behind the amplification of a number of challenges we face today. So those are the two stories. Those are kind of the two different stories of the future that we face, that we are dealing with one way or another in many contexts, and to activate this potential, right, in the heart of the system, kind of really to activate our capacity to work from regeneration, from ego to eco, and from sensing and actualizing emerging future possibility, is something that we feel is possible now, but that in order to be embodied at the scale of the whole requires us to form these islands of coherence, small islands of coherence that then through activities like the ones we are engaged in, perhaps can grow into an ecosystem of coherence and be more significant kind of for the future of the whole. So let me end with where we ended with, actually, in Chile, kind of when I think it was the last day where I shared something with you that that really clarified for me during those days that we had together, which is really the question, okay, if we want to, so we have the cycle of distraction and absencing up here, which is also, and then we have the cycle of creation and presencing here. And I think what we see today is that as change makers, it's not enough to just focus on this. We also need to engage these forces here. And what are the qualities that are required of us that we need to cultivate? And here's what I have been noticing and seeing. It's kind of the first quality is humility, right? which really is about access our not knowing, access our deeper levels of listening. The second one is equanimity, which really is about moving to the edge of our comfort zone, right? Access kind of the edges of our comfort zone and accessing and allowing to sense the situation from a very different angle and point of view and body of experience that is not my own. And lastly, it has to do with stillness. In stillness, right, access your stillness is really access you're not reacting, right, not habitually reacting to a situation. But stillness means kind of letting go in order through that letting go to connect to a deeper space where perhaps something new